Uh, I got a cold for the holidays. I could barely talk. Ugh. Soup all day. Staying covered up. Staying in bed. But I know one cure for a bad cold. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Now available in lozenges.
Everybody, welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith, the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I was also, assistant editor when I started there. And then I worked at WCW Magazine. I worked with Wrestling's Main Event Magazine and WOW Magazine, other magazines, entertainment magazines, you name it. I was in publishing for decades, but now I'm the host of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We're glad to have you here. We're glad to have Joe Puccio back with us. We're going to talk about celebrities who became wrestlers and wrestlers who became celebrities, or crazy mix-em-ups. Wrestlers who got involved with stage and screen, and also actors and musicians who got involved in wrestling. There's so many of them. We're going to go through as many as we can. We have our pick for the choice of the best ever. We bet you'll agree with this one wholeheartedly. So get yourself the beverage and snack that you're so required to have when you listen to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We won't list any. Who are we to tell you what to eat? I mean, what business is it of ours? You should have whatever you like, be it a Hershey bar, a ham sandwich, or even granola. It's none of our business. So while you're picking stuff out of your pantry, here's something for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all the great shows they have there. Take it away. Time for our look at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, of which this podcast is a member of. It all starts with the Wrestling Memory Grenade with Ray Russell. Join him as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Multimania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express. They're going to travel back to all different promotions and timelines. You won't want to miss a single episode of the Wrestling Memory Grenade. The regional wrestling podcast, also hosted by Ray Russell, is 100% territory-based, dedicated to all those great promotions from the past, along with a slew of guest co-hosts. All kinds of topics, including event results, special interviews, yearly breakdowns, obscure outlaw promotions, and a whole lot more. That's the Regional Wrestling Podcast. One of the great wrestlers of the 1970s, Bob Roop, now has his own podcast. It's the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. He welcomes you into the show as he shares stories, historical moments, and memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker, inside all facets of professional wrestling, including his very strange stint in Florida. GG's Puro Wrestling Academy. You can travel back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. For all of you out there, it is a history lesson in every episode. You'll never hear anything quite like DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join your host, Dan, as he travels back in time to discuss the history of Japanese pro wrestling. He spent decades studying the world of Japanese wrestling, and now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to all of you out there. If you want to know about Japanese wrestling, this is the podcast for you. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. He brings a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the programs. He goes back in time to rewatch and review pro wrestling from years gone by. You get a breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and you can watch along, so you can enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. It started out as Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. They're up to almost 18 episodes now of two of the greatest wrestlers from the South ever to lace up a pair of boots. From the USWA to the NWA, you won't want to miss a single episode of Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of the longest lasting podcasts in podcast history is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. Tons of guests, tons of history, a host who knows everything about the World Wrestling Association, and a whole lot more. You'll see new stars, old stars, stars in between. You hear them all on Wrestling Nostalgia. It was the WWF versus WCW. Raw versus Nitro, and it's the Monday Night Raw. That's right. Monday Warfare Raw versus Nitro is a podcast that has 30 episodes. You won't miss any of them. If you remember those days, it was neck and neck as the two giants battled for TV supremacy. Check out Monday Warfare Raw versus Nitro. The Other Ship Podcast. It's a pop culture podcast with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, TV, music, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other new concepts you may not have heard on any other podcast. As they themselves say, laugh your ass off on the voyage aboard the Other Ship. The Captain's Corner Pod features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest going on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Don't miss Nick on the Captain's Corner Pod. Also on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, TR Shocks the World, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast, WCNN News, TR Shocks the World, and the Power Hour. And there's probably a lot more podcasts to come on one of the biggest wrestling podcast networks you will find. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you find all these great shows? Here's an easy way to start. Just log on to WrestleCopia.com, press a couple buttons, and get on that journey into wrestling past, present, and future. Well, folks, I'm sitting here with one of my favorite Outdated Wrestling Hour co-hosts, Joe Puccio, and we both love dogs. We've been talking about dogs for the last 15 to 20 minutes. How you doing, Joe? Welcome back. It's really good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Bob. Thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, I'm doing fine. My dog is doing fine. And yeah, we just had a good conversation about our love of animals. But no, I'm doing great. And I am really happy to be back here.
So greetings from Bella the dog and Bailey the cat. You want to hear something funny? We adopt senior pets, which is both great and awful because it's great because you're giving an older animal a chance for a second chance, but it's awful in the fact you don't get that long with them. You know, right. It's not as long as if you got them as puppies or kittens. But this is the cool part. So we had this cat named Bailey for a while, who was joined by our dog Bella. And we're looking for a dog bed or a cat bed to make the new dog comfortable. And we pull out this dog pillow, big, giant, oversized pillow. And I look at the tag on it, and the manufacturer was Bailey and Bella.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Scary, right?
That is pretty crazy.
It is crazy. It's crazy. So I can't think of the two without thinking of this pillow, you know, because that's the name. And they came with these names, these pets, and we didn't name them.
Right. Yeah.
So they came with the name, but anyway, maybe they were in business before. I don't know. Anything is possible.
You never know.
Well, anyway, you are the host and proprietor of the fabulous website called Generation X Wire. Tell us what's going on with your esteemed journalistic endeavor.
So thanks, Bob. GenerationXWire.com. We cover a little of everything for the Generation X crowd, whether it's music, movies, television, obviously wrestling. We're doing a wrestling podcast here, but we cover a little of everything. Recently, we've done have an eclectic mix of stuff. I interviewed the original 3 actresses from The Facts of Life, interviewed Dean Butler from Little House on the Prairie, the horror actress, the mother on E.T., Dee Wallace, Rebecca Arthur from the sitcom Perfect Strangers. So we try to do a little bit of little quirky things too, maybe things that you wouldn't really see in a lot of other places. We also have a really cool new writer that joined the website, JC Correa. He's done a lot of reviews for us over the past couple of months. He reviewed the new Elvis documentary, the new Beatles 64 documentary on Disney Plus, a couple of movies as well. So we're trying to do a mix of things. So we got NFL picks every week, and yeah, it's doing really well, and I appreciate it.
I keep forgetting you do NFL picks. It sounds a little out of place on that particular forum, but do what you want. It's Generation X.
It's true. It's true. That sort of came later after the site was established. But there's a big market for that. People are into their football. And they look at it every week. But yeah, so it's a little bit for everybody. So it's doing well, and yeah, I appreciate anyone checking it out.
Well, I want to recommend it because it is not your usual thing. You will find information you won't get anywhere else. And it's all very professionally written, edited, and laid out. So you're going to have a lot of fun with Generation X Wire. So congratulations on everything that's been going on there. You've been really busy with it of late. I see that.
Yeah, we've done a lot lately, and now we haven't done anything in a week or so. I guess the end of the year it's a little tough, now the holiday season. But I have a lot of ideas for 2025. So hopefully we get a lot of those things come to fruition. Maybe get some new people on the site as well. But yeah, hopefully you stay tuned and you see some new content pretty soon.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell our listeners here that we are recording this the day after Christmas. So we're both kind of shagged out from the holidays here, but it's funny. I don't have any kids or anything, but Christmas wears me out. You know what it is? It's the lead into Christmas as a working person. It's like it never gets easy. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just, the older you get, the more it's, don't get me wrong. It's fun. You spend it with family. You have good meals and you talk about, you get together, you talk, you haven't seen each other in a while, but obviously it could be pretty stressful too. Just the anticipation, just getting everybody together, just, leading up to it. It could be a lot. So I think everybody kind of has a little bit of a sigh of relief when it's over.
Hey, I can't eat that. I got gallstones. You know how it
right.
works.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. But anyway, here's why we're here. Celebrity involvement in professional wrestling. I will start this with a caveat, and this is just my meager opinion. I, as a fan and later as a journalist, and now as just an observer, could care less. The involvement of a celebrity, musician, actor, or general in the news person in pro wrestling I've never cottoned to it. I don't care. I like wrestlers. That's why it says wrestling on the marquee. I like to watch trained professional wrestlers, not so much, people slap fighting in a corner somewhere. Joe, I don't know how you feel about it. Some people get all excited when somebody famous gets involved. Lately, we've had Bad Bunny, Mr. Paul, right?
Yep.
Mr. Logan Paul, who actually ain't bad. I thought he was a terrific tool. He was really an unlikable sort, and that's a talent.
It is. No, I kind of agree. For the most part, I agree with you. It's never been something that's really excited me watching wrestling. But I guess, it's sort of understandable because I guess the idea for the most part to get these celebrities in is really to get new fans and to sort of like bring in the fans of those celebrities maybe and just get some new eyes on the product. So I guess it's not really so much to really impress the current fan because they're going to watch it anyway. But I've sort of always felt the same way. It never did anything for me, unless of course it happens to be a celebrity that I am really into. Of course, maybe someone that I just happen to really be a fan of, and you get a kick out of it, seeing him in wrestling, which is kind of like, that's our thing. Wrestling is our little thing. So seeing a celebrity in that might have appeal, but I agree with you for the most part. Absolutely.
Of course, when talking about celebrities in wrestling, I'm going to cut to one name that I have here. I think the most successful of somebody who was just a celebrity and a kind of a B celebrity was The Miz.
Yeah.
For being on a reality show. And nobody even knows that anymore. He's been so successful in WWE that people look at him as a wrestler and nothing else now. And that's rare. That's a hard thing to pull off. So I got to give him credit for that. I really like him in terms of he makes you want to throw your shoe at the TV, and that's a skill. And he's not an awful wrestler. He's a little on the undersized, for my taste. But overall, I think he's done a bang-up job since he entered the WWE. What do you think?
Yes, he's pretty underrated, actually. Yeah, like you said, he's not going to win any 5-star matches or anything like that for the most part. Think about it this way: he's been around for a long time, and
Yeah.
how many guys can you say that about? I mean, half these guys, after they're there about 5-6 years, they're looking that they might get cut during the yearly cuts they do, and the Miz is still there. Could be wrong, but I think he had a run with the world title for a little bit too.
More than one.
Did he have? Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
has at least 2 world titles under his belt.
which, I mean, yeah, again, I don't know. I know that world title reigns aren't as meaningful as they once were, of course, but it's still impressive. And you're right, because, I have to say there was a time when I saw The Miz on TV, and all I could think about was this guy was an ex-reality show guy. And now you really don't think about that anymore. Now you really think of him as a pro wrestler.
What is it about the real jerky guys? It's like when they're new, you hate them, get them off my screen. I used to say that about The Miz. I said about Logan Paul. I said it about the honky type. Those really guys that are just, get them off. I can't stand this guy. That means they're doing their job. They're really good at being, crummy. And that's a skill. And to get people to pay a ticket and come see that, I got a hats off to all of them now. For some reason, for me, the passage of time watching guys like that, realizing what they accomplished, I'm more in awe of them 10 or 15 years later than were while they were doing it. Because it's like you look back and go, yeah, he did his job and he did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, it's a skill. That is not easy. People might think it's easy to get in front of the crowd, insult them, or call it cheap heat, whatever you will. That is not an easy thing, because there are just as many guys that try to do that, and they're met with silence. Nothing. The fans just don't care. So if you can get the fans to actually hate you, like The Miz did, pretty much right off the bat, he pretty much did that pretty much from the beginning. It's a talent, it's a skill.
So what we're going to do here, gang, is we're going to look at wrestlers in film and TV, and we're going to look at film and TV people that came into wrestling and musicians that came into wrestling, the whole 9 yards. And we're just going to wing it, because I like winging on this show. Our best shows, our highest rated shows, are just talking. These people with the notes. Advice to fellow podcasters: take your notes and flush them. No, really, the best shows are just talking. So I'm going to talk about a guy so craggy and old that probably very few of the younger people listening will know who I'm talking about. A guy named Mike Mazurki, probably the first crossover wrestler who went into, I guess, legitimate entertainment afterwards. He was a big-time pro wrestler who turned into a big-time character actor in films and on TV for decades. Guarantee you, if you're over 40 listening to the show, you have seen him in something. The Beverly Hillbillies or Green Acres or Adam 12 or Dragnet or any TV show you can think of. This guy was on hundreds of TV shows. In wrestling, he was a famous big man with a craggy face, mean guy, 6'5", and he appeared in over 140 movies and countless TV shows. I mean, what a career. From the 30s to the 90s. Unbelievable. I have a big time bio on him, but the fact that everybody kind of knew who Mike Mazurki was, everybody kind of knew he was a wrestler at one point, which fascinates me, because he stopped wrestling probably by 1960 or so.
Wow.
And spent the rest of his career in film and TV. But he was even he did a lot of stuff. He was a bodyguard for Mae West, the original film sex symbol, right? He went to act in TV and film from the 30s to the 90s on any show that needed a tough guy who would beat somebody up. They called Mike Mazurki. My favorite moment is when he beat the tar out of on Adam 12, Kent McCord and Martin Millie. He was throwing them all over a house. And he was like 65 years old at the time, and they were in the 30s, and he was still beating the tar out of him, which I thought was kind of pushing it a little bit. But he was so big, it looked natural for him. And most of the moves he used kind of looked like wrestling moves. I think he did a backbreaker at one point. I'm not even kidding. It's just, but Mike Mazurki may have been the first wrestler to really make it big, crossing over. And he won the NWA Western Tag Team title in 1956 with a guy named Rex Lane. He was, during his career, in the ring with Blassie, Don Leo Jonathan, who he had a feud against, Mr. Moto, Angelo Savoldi, Johnny Walker, Hans Herman, the German star, Bruno Sammartino, Bob Orton Sr., the Fabulous Kangaroos, Dan O'Mahony, and the list goes on. To me, the ultimate tough wrestler becoming tough actor. That's Mike Mazurki. He's legendary.
It is. That's impressive. I mean, to have that many roles and to be a character actor and have so many jobs, it's not like you're talking about one or two things over here. And some of that stuff is kind of a little bit odd. I mean, I'll admit, I had no idea he was the bodyguard of Mae West. That's something I did not know until now. But yeah, a real character actor, a real tough guy. And I guess, his forte was always playing the heavy, right? Like sort of like the tough guy, the bouncer guy and he was perfect for that. So that's, yeah.
And you could just picture him in the ring. I never saw him in the ring, I'll be honest. I've never seen him in action because it's going back too long. But tell you what, when you see his picture, you'll go, good gosh, that's a big guy wrestler. He just big, craggy face, and tough guy voice, the whole stereotypical bad guy. That was Mike Mazurki. So here's what you do. If you want to see him, type in Mike Mazurki, which is in YouTube, and he'll pop up 8,000 times. And I'm going to try to do that during the course of the thing here. We'll try to tell people where to go to see these folks.
Sure.
You want to chime in with somebody at any era, it doesn't matter. You just go with it.
All right. So like you said, I know we're going back and forth as far as we're looking at wrestlers who have appeared in film, television, things like that. And the opposite. We're looking at maybe TV actors and film actors, comedians that have been in wrestling. So I'm just going to start with, I think Bob knows this as well, probably my all-time favorite Hollywood personality that has ever been in wrestling, and that would be Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was someone that he really set the bar, I think, for all celebrities in wrestling. I'll say this, again, it could be a cliche that I guess that might be a lot of people's favorite, but at the same time, I think he might get forgotten about a little bit in this day and age when you think about that this stuff happened in the early 80s. And obviously we're in, almost in 2025 now, but this is a guy that had such a legendary feud with Jerry Lawler, who's on David Letterman, which the Letterman show, the late night with David Letterman was just so huge at the time. There was nothing bigger than that show. I think what always impressed me about Kaufman the most is that he respected pro wrestling so much. And I'll go on record as saying, I don't believe there was ever a celebrity to respect the sport of professional wrestling more than Kaufman, to the point where he just went in full fledged. He basically lived it. When he worked in Memphis, Jerry Jarrett, who has said this on many occasions, paid him. And I believe he paid him around the same amount of money that he was paying the main eventers at the time. Kaufman never once cashed one of those checks, which I think is so unbelievable, where you might say, okay, well, maybe he didn't really need the money. I'm sure he was fairly comfortable at the time, but that's sort of not the point. I mean, for a guy that was giving it his all, and the guy was doing that day in and day out, to never even cash a check, it just showed you how much he loved it. And he wasn't just doing it just to promote something, like I would say 95% of celebrities are doing. He was actually doing it because he loved it.
I will say that I consider the Letterman appearance with Lawler and Kaufman the greatest crossover moment in the history of pro wrestling. There's no question in my mind. Everybody bought that thing. Everybody said, what is going on here? And not only that, the build of Kaufman in Memphis wrestling. First, they were mad that he wrestled women. Then he started insulting on tapes he was making in California. Here's soap.
Yeah.
You Memphians don't know what soap is. And he was getting worse and worse each passing week, to the point where he had to have a match against Lawler, because Lawler was standing up for the people of Memphis. And of course, the infamous two pile driver match, which put him in the hospital, and where he wore that neck brace for ages. But what people don't know, who weren't watching Memphis wrestling itself at the time, Kaufman hung around on and off for the better part of a couple of years at least in Memphis, in cahoots with Jimmy Hart, causing all kinds of trouble at ringside, getting involved with some of the bad guys and stuff like that. He was so hated. If you want to see the greatest documentary about it, it's called I'm from Holllywood. It's available in streaming video and also on DVD. Get yourself a copy of it. It's as good as a WrestleMania. I'm telling you. Lance Russell is in it. He's all through it. Interviews with wrestling fans discussing the intricacies of the Lawler-Kaufman feud. Tons of match tape. Just tons of matches. The film is 75% matches.
Yeah.
And you'll get a feel for why the most despised man maybe in the history of Memphis wrestling was Andy Kaufman.
It's true. I mean, what I also think is just so incredible about that era is that the kayfabe was just no one. It was not till so many years later that anybody had any inkling that any of that could have been staged. That everyone just knew that Lawler and Kaufman hated each other, and it wasn't until years later. But believe it or not, I think it might have been Jim Carrey, who actually is the one that revealed that it wasn't, because Jim Carrey did that movie. But I mean, I just think, you look at that, if that would have happened nowadays, I mean, there's no way, the first second anything like that happened nowadays, the fans would just laugh at it. Oh, look at this angle, look at this. Back then, no, everybody thought it was real. And another interesting little tidbit on that is, I know that, from what I understand, Kaufman initially approached Vince McMahon Sr. about doing the whole angle in the WWF. Apparently, McMahon Sr. wanted no part of it. He just said, you know what, that's too showy. That's too, that's show business. I don't want that. So he didn't do it.
Well, my friend Bill Apter was integral with this whole Kaufman Lawler thing with Letterman, and I think Bill actually helped him go to the McMahons, and they didn't want it. They didn't want it. They said, it's too regional. It doesn't work for us. For whatever reason, they didn't want the interloper. They would rather show Bulldog Brown, Frank Williams, I guess. But
right.
It would have been big in New York. Even
I always wonder about that. How it would have been different, on a stage like that in the WWF.
It would have worked. Kaufman would have made it work. He was so creative that if they could look past their formula, the Vince McMahon Senior formula, which was really the introduction of a big bad guy who would beat up preliminary guys and work his way up to the number one contendership by beating a DiNucci, and then he would face Morales or San Martino. Mm-hmm. That was basically the whole show. Same with the tag team ratings.
Right.
It would have been interesting, but you know what? It was perfect just the way it was. So get yourself a copy of that and see Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey, which is another nice piece of work too. Pretty close to really what happened. I don't think they stretched that at all in the Jim Carrey film at all.
Yeah, I think it was pretty true. And I agree. Good movie. Definitely good movie. They did a really nice job with that. So it's definitely worth checking out if you've never seen it.
I was a Kaufman fan. I loved Tony Clifton. Nobody loved Tony Clifton, but I loved him. Hey, you, it can happen to you if you're young and hot. Hey, just this awful Borscht Belty, poorly tuxedoed, terribly manicured, blousy lounge singer, and for some reason Kaufman took a liking to this character and would just throw him anywhere on the Merv Griffin show. Or,
Yep.
And sometimes it was Kaufman, sometimes it was Bob Smuda, his partner in crime, Andy Kaufman's partner in crime. But it was all like wrestling. He loved being the bad guy.
Yeah.
You're wrestling the women. That's how it all got started. I mean, just boo.
What was it? The intergender wrestling champion of the world?
Wrestling champion of the world. That's right. Yeah. Nothing's ever. No, you're right. It's by far the best celebrity involvement ever. Nothing will ever come close. And if it does, I'll be doggone shocked. Because you needed that suspension of disbelief to make it work. And here's something else that had the suspension of disbelief. The unbelievable feud between Alex Karras, the pro football star, and Dick the Bruiser.
Yeah.
Which apparently was a work, but nobody knew it.
Yep. Same thing.
And if you don't know who Alex Karras was, he played for the Detroit Lions, and was on suspension at the time. By the way, Karras went on to be an actor. He's best known as Mongo in Blazing Saddles, and he was on the TV sitcom Webster.
Yeah. Him
and his wife were the parents of Webster, the little boy. And he was suspended team for allegedly gambling. I think I can't figure this one out. There was a bar fight in Detroit with Dick the Bruiser and Alex Karras. Some people said it was real. Some people said it was fake. I've read both. Like it was a stage thing. I think it was staged, but the cops didn't know it. and apparently 8 cops were, it took 8 cops just to get the Bruiser to calm down. And 2 of the cops got injured during the breakup of that thing. So they had a match on April 27th. I guess it was around 1963. 5 days after the brawl, in what was described as a disappointing crowd of 10,000 fans at the Olympia Stadium. The match itself was described as a major flop. It took over 11 minutes for Bruiser to really take care of Karras, who really probably didn't have much business being in the ring. But people still talk about that stuff to this day as one of the most unusual matches of all time. It came out of nowhere. They had a precursor in an actual bar fight. I mean, strange stuff, but it sounds a lot like Dick the Bruiser the more I think of it, because Dick would go out in the line and do this wacky stuff to try to build a crowd.
Yeah. And like you said, suspension of disbelief. I mean, that was key in a lot of these actors and involved in wrestling and vice versa. I mean, it just I think that's such a big part of why it worked back then. It was because we all believed it, and not so much anymore, but no, it's the way it is.
All I know is I kept seeing pictures of both Bruiser and Alex Karras, and they looked all beat up. I mean, after the wrestling match, too, which apparently wasn't that great of a match because, like I said, Karras wasn't a wrestler. But they looked like they kind of beat the tar out of each other during that match, too. So It's like, hey, two tough guys want to go at it? What's wrong with that? And I'm sure it was a nice payday for Alex Karras, who was suspended from football. I don't think there are any rules about him taking part in a wrestling match. And in a way, it was kind of brilliant. So to me, I would love to know more about that whole thing from anybody who might have been there. I should talk to Dave Brzezinski about that from Detroit.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
And maybe before his time, but I'm sure he knows more about it than I do.
Yeah.
And that could be really interesting. All right, you got another weasel old timer there, buddy.
I'll just throw out a name here, and this is someone that was huge in the early to mid 1980s. I'll say that I think this man was just integral to the WWF's expansion and success back then in the 83, 84 years, and that's Mr. T. So Mr. T, no one's ever going to say this guy was a, master thespian or anything like that, but I think unless you grew up in the 80s, unless you were around in that era, I don't think people realize just how big he was. He was the number one action guy, TV star there was around. I mean, everybody loved this guy, obviously on the A-Team, which was the show that he became famous on. His angle with in the WWF, teaming up with Hulk Hogan, appearing at the first WrestleMania and the main event, that whole thing, that whole couple of months, a year run that he had there, that was just huge. And I honestly don't know if that first WrestleMania would have been even close to as successful as it was. Don't get me wrong, it would have been successful, but I don't think it would have been anywhere as close to what they did because it was just such a huge crossover. And I mean, he was one of the things that really got me into the first WrestleMania when I was a kid back then. Like I said, I just don't know that the younger generation today probably realizes just how pivotal that was. What do you think?
I agree. And I think you didn't even have to be a big Mr. T fan to want to see it. There was something about the specialness of it then. It was unusual. Like you say, there hadn't been celebrities involved in a long time, not since the Muhammad Ali thing, way back, with Barrett Secluded, Gorilla Monsoon, and then the Inoki. So this is really the first thing since then, in the East Coast at least, that had that type of appeal. Like you said, Mr. T was a big TV star. I can't even remember the name of it. The A-Team?
The A-Team, yeah.
He was big, but not tall. I don't think he was as tall as the other wrestlers were.
Right.
So there was a factor. Was he going to get hurt? Will he look good in the ring? As it turned out, no, and not really. But still, he didn't embarrass himself, I think. Well, how did you think he did the match?
I thought he did okay, but I think they protected him. I think, obviously in that main event, he worked with Piper and Orndorff and Bob Orton. So I think they all protected him. Obviously he came in for his spots and he didn't have to do much. He didn't do a lot of intricate stuff, but he certainly didn't embarrass himself. And I think you alluded to something else. You said how his size was. He wasn't that tall, but he was obviously really in great shape. The thing about Mr. T is he legitimately exuded toughness. Everybody thought that he was a tough guy, where as it turned out from what I've read, he really, he didn't have a background in fighting, or he didn't, he wasn't a boxer or anything like that. I don't think he really was like that, but I think that's not what the fans thought. The fans saw this guy. He was this big, tough guy on the A-Team, pity the fool, if you remember his catchphrase. And I think that's one of the reasons why it worked too. It's not like they brought in, say Jay Leno years later in WCW, where obviously we know that this guy is not really known for being a tough guy. This was someone that people legitimately thought was tough. And I think all the pieces fell into place. And you just mentioned Muhammad Ali from years earlier. Coincidentally, McMahon brought in Muhammad Ali for that first WrestleMania, obviously just for a referee or something like that, nothing physical. They brought in all these celebrities. They had the Rockettes, which was pretty cool. I think they walked in Liberace. Liberace was there. If you're, how much of a bigger celebrity was there than him back in the day?
Billy Martin. I mean, the list went on. It was crazy. It was crazy. But, I will say this too. As far as the Mr. T things go, people forget this. The night before, and I believe it was an afternoon card at that point, they were Hogan and T were hosting SNL.
Yeah.
That was the year that Billy Crystal and those guys, Christopher Guest, were regular cast members. And so it was just a few hours later that they took part in this, which flabbergasted everybody in wrestling. Because, aren't they going to get some rest before they do this?
Yeah.
Dick Ebersol was the executive producer of SNL at that point, who also had a hand in wrestling, decided in its main event. So I think it all tied together, if you know what I mean, as a mutual pizzazz before the wrestling show took place the next day.
And I love the little tidbit about Mr. T too. I always love the story about, I guess, Paul Orndorff, who was working with him at that time, I guess didn't take too kindly to celebrities in wrestling at the time. He was very old school. So I know there's a lot of stories. I'm sure there's some exaggerated a little bit, but I know him and Mr. T didn't get along. And from what I understand, T was a little apprehensive of working with Orndorff because I think he thought maybe Orndorff was going to legit rough him up a little in the ring. So I always got a kick out of that because Orndorff was always one of my favorites, a real legitimate tough guy. Just, he looked like such a badass in the ring. So I always thought that was pretty interesting, the behind the scenes drama.
I don't know what's true and what isn't because I kept reading that Orton and Orndorff really didn't want to be involved with T because he wasn't a pro and they considered it almost an insult that he'd be in the ring with them. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've read that.
Yeah.
But I read a lot of other things too. So I take everything with a grain of salt because after all, it's wrestling,
Yeah.
All right. Here's a couple quickies. Then the King of Los Angeles Wrestling, Fred Blassie, appeared on the Dick Van Dyke Show in 1962, lifting up Dick Van Dyke over his shoulders and doing a dance called the Twessel, which was based on the Twizzle, which was based on the Twist. It was a musical Dick Van Dyke Show where they were all dancing throughout and Blassie just scared everybody at the end and just danced with Dick Van Dyke on his shoulders as the episode faded to black. I loved it. I'm a Blassie geek anyway. I thought that was really a great use of Freddie Blassie. You can see it on all those streaming free networks. Just find the show with the Twizzle and you'll see Fred Blassie at the very end. I
know that exists. I have to say I've never seen that episode and I am going to make a note of that to look that up because I have to see that.
Also, King Curtis, big King Curtis Iau Kea, billed as Iau Kea, had a part in a Three Stooges film in 1963 called The Three Stooges Go Around the World in a Days, based on Around the World in 80 Days. He played a sumo wrestler in the film. Mo of the Stooges exclaimed in the movie, "That's not a man, that's a committee." That's how big King Curtis was. And I understand that Curtis did a couple of other film or cameo roles during his career, but that's the one, of course, that I love because I love the Stooges too. I don't love the Joe DeRita Stooges. He was in that movie, and I admit I actually rented the VHS tape just to see King Curtis join the Three Stooges, and I think he took on. I think Joe DeRita took on King Curtis in the sumo wrestling ring. I think it's been a while. But I do remember seeing it.
How about King Kong Bundy? Do you remember when King Kong Bundy appeared twice in Married with Children?
I was starting to think he was going to be a regular. He was on it twice. Is something to talk about.
Yeah, I remember that very distinctly. He played two different characters, I believe. I think once he was a member of the Bundy family. I'm pretty sure his name was, I don't know, ask me why I remember this, but I think he was Uncle Irwin.
I just put two and two together right now. That must be dense. Bundy.
But someone could correct me if I'm wrong. I know this sounds like I'm making this up. I really think that the creators of Married with Children the last name Bundy had something to do with King Kong Bundy. I read that they were fans, or there's some kind of connection. I don't know if that was the full reason, but again, I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but I don't think I am. But yeah, King Kong Bundy had a memorable role on that show. And then I think he was on a couple other things that popped up throughout the years. I think there was a Weird Science TV show, not the movie, but there was a short-lived series, and he appeared on that. So I always thought that was an interesting one, a kind of a fun cameo for him.
Yeah, he did a commercial too, as I recall. I just don't remember for what. But he had that look. He looked like a big wrestler. That's perfect. Wrestlers on game shows. This is what kills me. They all went on the game shows to make a buck. They weren't celebrities on the game show. They were contestants on these game shows.
It's hilarious.
I still can't get over this. Like Ox Baker on The Price is Right with Bob Barker in 1981.
Yep.
And he won some stuff. According to my research, you can all look this up. He won an oven range, whatever that is, some wicker furniture, and a stereo. Nick Bockwinkel was on the Hollywood Squares in 1968, and he won big. He won a car, a kitchen set, and $1,300. That's a booty back then.
Not too shabby.
Brian Kendrick went on The Price is Right in 2011, and apparently he didn't tell the management at TNA where he was working at the time. Apparently didn't win anything. Now, here's one I didn't know about until I was digging this stuff up. The Moolah, the Fabulous Moolah, was on To Tell the Truth in the 1960s in an episode there. And it was her and two big guys all dressed in the wrestling garb. And the celebrities had to guess which one was the wrestler, and nobody picked Moolah. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That one I've seen. I want to say I saw it about 5 years ago. And I found that fascinating just because, I think it was like a wrestling site that sort of directed me to the episode that's the reason why I was watching it. And I just thought it was fascinating knowing what we know. Obviously that's the Fabulous Moolah. How does nobody know who the Fabulous Moolah is? But just seeing how clueless the contestants were, and they're asking them these questions, and you could just kind of tell that she was going to win, that she was going to, gonna get them to guess one of the others, and sure enough, she did. Right, they guessed one of the other guys on the show. But that was a really, really cool appearance. One of my favorites.
Okay, here's the punchline. Ready for the punchline? Because nobody picked her, she was the winner. She won $1,000 and a carton of Camel cigarettes.
There you go.
Oh, is that dated, boy? I'll tell you, that's great. Oh, I have never seen it. I have to dig that show up now and watch that.
Oh, yeah.
By the way,
it's available. Yeah.
YouTube, baby. I'm sure it's on YouTube. That sounds like a YouTuber to me. I could be wrong. I just want to mention one more thing about Nick Bockwinkel. He also was an actor at times in his youth. He's a very handsome guy. He was on the Monkees in 1967 and Hawaii Five-0 in 1969.
Wow.
As an actor, so...
I can't picture Bockwinkel on the Monkees, I have to admit,
I think I remember seeing it, and I don't remember the deal. I think he played a bodyguard or something. And they were like bouncing off of him or something.
Yeah.
I just don't, the Monkees were so frenetic the whole show all the time. That I don't know if he had any speaking lines either. He just was, I think, in some kind of law enforcement or something.
Just getting back real quick before we move on to Ox Baker, who you just mentioned. I want to mention that one I saw without even knowing that he was going to be on. I think I was watching an old episode of The Price is Right. I saw him on there on one of these game show networks, and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, is that Ox Baker?
Well, Doug Baker, right?
Yeah, they gave him a different name. He had a different name, and it was just so weird seeing him as a legitimate contestant on a show like that.
I'll spin the wheel, Bob. I mean, that voice is, my gosh.
It's like you thought it was a publicity stunt, but it wasn't.
I want to say publicly, I got to hang with him a couple of times. He was the nicest guy you'd ever meet, at least to me. A real gentleman is, hello, Bob, but he always had that voice, and which made him at times a good color commentator and a good manager later in his career. So, Ox Baker, born to do it. And something, check out if you can. There's some tapes from Big Time Wrestling in the late 60s of him without the facial foliage. Without a beard and the big handlebar mustache.
Wow.
Wasn't the same guy. Whoever convinced him to get that look was a genius because he turned into an entirely different guy at that point.
Yeah, no.
I mean, it made him, his look made him. Let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
He looked like, well, the guy in what movie was he in? Escape from New York with Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
As a bad guy, as a fighter. I don't remember specifically what he did. I just remember he was an ominous presence in the film, and he just was, got some film roles thanks to it too. What a look! I mean, just the look. Say what you want about his ring skills. I know he was limited, but you know what? He had the look, and the look sells tickets.
Yeah, true. How about, I'm going to give you a pair, two people that were associated with each other, one from each industry. The wrestler, Captain Lou Albano, who did many different appearances on television, film, music videos. And I'll get to him in a second, but Cyndi Lauper, who, again, not to go back to the first WrestleMania again, but another one of these celebrities that was just huge. She was just as big as Madonna in the early 80s. Obviously at some point Madonna passed her on the scale, but there was a point where they were about equal.
I can vouch for that. I was a record store manager at the time, and for the Record World chain in New York State.
Yeah, sure.
And Madonna was the bigger star at the time, and the album "She's So Unusual," of which Girls Just Want to Have Fun, the video with Captain Lou, sprung from. That album sat in a store for about 3 months. Nobody picked it up, and then that video came out, and jackpot. I think there were like 5 hit singles off that first album. Like her first album, She's So Unusual, is the greatest hits.
Exactly. Yeah.
There was so many hits on it. You couldn't stop her. She Bop and all those other songs.
Yep.
But I think it was of course, the video that did it with Captain Lou.
It really was. And I just think, everybody knows there's so many stories about how they met. Lauper and Cyndi Lauper, I think, met on a plane. And Lauper, the story is, I guess Albano convinced Lauper to do something in wrestling, and the rest was history. Of course, she became sort of associated with wrestling for many years there. Yeah, so I think both of them, but getting back to Albano, he was great. Albano was really, he was really good in that sort of character actor, that kind of, wise guy role. He did a lot of appearances. He was in the movie Body Slam. If you remember, it was, I want to say 85, 86 with Dirk Benedict, who was in the A-Team. Tanya Roberts was in that movie. But then other than that, he popped up everywhere. He was, I know, I'm saying that you're giving me the thumbs down here. I mean, hey, look, he's not going to win any Academy Awards, that's for sure. But if you remember, he did a lot of sitcoms in the 80s. Did
he play, was he in another movie playing like a mafia guy or a Goomba or something like that?
That was Wise Guys, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
He was in Wise Guys. He did the Super Mario Brothers kid show. He did, if you remember, in the 80s, there was that sitcom with Marla Gibbs, 227. He did Different Strokes with Gary Coleman. He was on there. So, I mean, that guy really did get around. And I don't know if it was due to the association with Lauper that kind of springboarded him into these things, but I just think that's a really powerful combination, those two, because she did a lot for his career. And I think at the time, he did a lot for Lauper's career. I think part of the reason why Lauper was also involved at the time was her then boyfriend, who was also her manager, David Wolf, was a guy that was sort of involved. I think maybe he was just a big wrestling fan and he decided to get her involved in that. But yeah, that was always one of my favorite appearances by a celebrity. I just think she did a bang up job there. She really did.
This just popped into my mind. It's amazing what a couple years can do. A couple years before the Rock and Wrestling Connection, which they started. Albano is on the Letterman show by himself, just as a guest. And Letterman the night before says, tomorrow we're going to have pro wrestling personality. And the key word is personality, says Letterman. And Albano comes on, and it was the most vile, disgusting, slovenly. And he wasn't funny, and he wasn't clever, and he was just a slob and gruff and nasty. And he wasn't going over. The audience was groaning, and Letterman was like, oh, thanks for coming on. And you could tell the segment was flatter than a pancake because he came on as the wrestling manager, Captain Lou Albano, who was like a real whack job of a slob manager and stayed in character. Didn't work.
No.
Didn't work. Yeah, I would love to see that appearance again because if you watch it, you could hear the audience groaning and Letterman is like, he's got his head in his hands going, oh, God, will this guy shut up? In a way, it works in a wrestling way because if you want to get hated, everybody in the audience hated Captain Lou Albano after this. But was it entertaining? I dare say not, because it was like it didn't work. It was like it was a good Letterman show up to that point, and then they bring this big slob on who just sat there insulting everybody. The usual lines. You put his brain in a parakeet, it would fly backwards. All the usual stuff he used to say. And it just wasn't going over at all.
I'd love to check that out. I don't think I've ever seen that clip there.
Yes, not the Rock and Wrestling Albano, the filthy Captain Lou Albano. By the way, who I described in an article, one of the few articles that got quoted in the national media, I described him as a walking fart. And that was early Lou Albano. Albano between 73, 74 and the end of his bad guy run was really a vile, loathsome, disgusting human being. Legit.
Do you remember when Albano used to be on? This is going to be probably more for people in the New York metropolitan area, but Albano was a frequent guest on the late night Joe Franklin show back then. I mean, he was on all the time. I think Blassie was on a few times too, but Joe Franklin was basically a radio personality that had a talk show.
Oh, sure.
And, he was sort of a very polarizing host. A lot of people thought he was, he was kind of boring. A lot of people liked him. My dad turned me on to him. My dad used to watch Joe Franklin, and there were a few times he'd call me in. I remember when I was a kid, and he'd say, "Hey Joe, look at this. Lou Albano was on Joe Franklin," and I was like, "What?" It was just such a weird combo. But he made several appearances on that show. He got around, Albano. He really did.
Lou Albano also was on the Uncle Floyd show with NRBQ. Who did a song called Captain Lou Albano?
Yeah.
I won't sing it because of copyright, deals, but I remember the song. It was ridiculous.
I remember it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Joe Franklin, let's be serious here. Got the ratings of a test pattern. I mean, it was only on because it was on. They did get a couple sponsors, and it was in the days of when nobody was really watching late night TV past the Tonight Show or anything like that. And he was on really late at night, like midnight or something.
I think it was like 1 a.m. or something.
And he had a usual coterie of really whack guests, and sometimes he'd have somebody famous, but a lot of times he didn't. Like he'd have some songstress from Jersey on. Here is a great new talent, my friends. You will love this young lady. It's just
who's another big guest on his show was Tiny Tim. Would always do the show. Yeah,
sure.
Who also did some wrestling as well. He was on Raw a few times, I believe.
Get out of here!
I believe so. I'm
Tiny
pretty
Tim.
Sure. I think he did, yeah.
Well, if you insist, I never saw it, but if you say it, it's
don't quote me. But I want to say I do remember him on once or twice. I'll have to look that up as well.
Roddy Piper. Speaking of rock and wrestling, one of the instigators during that period, easily one of the best wrestler turned actors ever, especially in They Live in 1988. If you have a copy of an old wrestling magazine, I think it was in The Wrestler, where there's an interview with Roddy Piper. I conducted that interview, and every word in it is 100% legit. In case you're wondering, one of the real highlights of my career was interviewing Roddy Piper at that period of time, and had a blast. We really had fun. We talked for probably about a half an hour. It was a great conversation, which I have never forgotten to this day. And I was thinking about it as I was putting the show together. I probably have that cassette somewhere.
Oh wow, that would be cool.
I used to save my interviews on a cassette, and Boy, if I could dig those up and transpose those would be great to put on the show. I never thought of it until now.
That is very cool. Yeah, I met Piper once a few years before he passed away, and he was great. He was really great to talk to. Had some great stories. He was. I think he was one of those guys. He was able to find his niche in acting. He did it. The roles that he did. He didn't do that many, but the roles that he did, they really fit him well. Obviously, They Live was his big one, his breakout role.
Believe it or not, he actually did a lot more acting than people gave him credit for. He would star in kind of avant-garde films and some oddball stuff. Yeah, I remember Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Yep, I remember that.
Some other titles. He did a lot of work, a lot more than people gave him credit for, I think. But the beauty part is They Live was a legit good movie.
Oh, it was.
And a science fiction classic. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing with the mind control and stuff like that is used in political circles to this day. Obey, consume, all that stuff. It was a heady film for a sci-fi, and he was the perfect He had some great lines. I don't know if I can quote. Oh, yeah, I guess I can quote him. What is it? I'm here to kick ass, chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of bubble gum.
Bubblegum, yep. And remember, he did that great fight scene with that was what that movie was known for, where it was just like nonstop. What is it? I believe the actor was Keith
David.
David, yeah.
Yeah, Keith David. Great, really long fight scene.
Really
Not a
long, yeah.
wrestling fight scene, but it kind of on and on. But not a frame wasted because it was a good fight scene.
Well, you know what? Speaking of Piper, I have one for you. Do you remember when he did a show called Tag Team?
No.
This is something that is forgotten in history. I'm telling you, look this up. Roddy Piper and another guy who we haven't mentioned that I was going to mention anyway, so it's a good segue, Jesse Ventura, who was really great. He did some really great stuff. Piper and Ventura started an ABC pilot in either 1991 or 1992, and it was about a couple of ex-cops, Piper and Ventura, who become pro wrestlers. And I believe they only filmed maybe one episode, and I don't believe it ever aired. It was it was filmed, and they decided not to go forward with it. But there's actually, I think if you look it up, I'm sure you could find it on IMDb. It's out there, and I mean, can you imagine a show on ABC in prime time with Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura as two ex-cops as wrestlers? I mean, it almost sounds like a joke, but it really exists.
I'm sure it does. It sounds like something they would have come up with. Yeah, Jesse was legendary in Predator. I mean, it's one of the best secondary roles ever. He was in Running Man, and he's also with Gene Okerlund in the Exorcist spoof Repossessed with Linda Blair. Find it. It's actually funny.
I got to check that out. I've never seen that.
The stuff that comes out of Gene Okerlund's mouth will shock you. Supposedly they're as wrestling interviewers, right? They both have, he's got the tux on, and Gene, Jesse's dressed like he is, and they're interviewing Linda Blair, who's under the Satan spell at that point. And some of the stuff is kind of off color, but a lot of it is really funny. And you won't believe what Gene says in this film. You got to see Repossessed. It's probably on cable or streaming somewhere. It's a cheapie with Leslie Nielsen. Leslie Nielsen is also in it. Yeah.
Wow.
As Father May I
have to check that out. No, I definitely have never seen that, but that sounds like it would be really cool. I mean, yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, I always thought Running Man was really underrated. I loved Richard Dawson in that. I was always a huge Richard Dawson fan. Obviously, we talked about Predator. He did Demolition Man, and another one that he did that I guarantee, Bob, you've never seen this because this is just one of those like crazy offbeat, ridiculous 1980 sitcoms. Jesse Ventura was in an episode of Small Wonder. This was a show in the mid 80s about a family. The father was a scientist or something like that. And he created a little girl, he created a robot that looked like a little girl. And basically this little girl went around and they had to hide the secret that he actually wasn't a daughter. She was actually a robot. This was a show that lasted, I want to say, about 3 seasons. And if you look at these like worst TV shows of all time lists, generally speaking, Small Wonder will be in like the top, say, 10 or 20.
Of terrible shows.
And Ventura was on the show.
It even sounds bad.
Yeah. It's a cult classic, and I use that term loosely, but I have friends that actually make fun of me because I reference it a lot of times because I have these like fond memories of it just because it was so insane, but it like really like speaks 1980s. 1980s was known for those kind of nutty shows at that time, and it really was, But yeah, Ventura was on.
What was it, Urkel? What was the show? What was Urkel's show?
Family Matters.
Yeah, was there a wrestling? I think there was a wrestling edition of that show, as I recall.
There was the Bushwhackers.
The Bushwhackers.
Bushwhackers were on it. Yep.
Oh, and then there was a robot Urkel. Boy, the stuff people watched as families in the 80s was bizarre.
I know.
I mean, this is not even.
It's so different today,
Well, I'll tell you what. I want to talk here about the worst use of celebrities of all time had to be WCW. Even though it was the ratings king for a while, I don't understand. RoboCop was Sting. Leslie Nielsen taking part in the search for Cactus Jack after a riveting angle where Big Van Vader slams Cactus on an unprotected ring floor, right? And at the end of the show, you see Cactus being hauled away in an ambulance. It was like real serious stuff. And then they turned it into comedy vignettes, including the search for Cactus Jack. Whoever the bookers were, I hope they never got near a professional wrestling ring again. You took a serious looking, violent angle and turned it into indescribable awfulness. I think even Cactus would admit this. It's just, I can't believe what they did. And then they brought in a rapper, Master P, and his No Limit Soldiers, which made no sense, didn't go over for 5 minutes, and he had some wrestlers in his No Limit Soldiers. Certainly a career highlight for Brett Armstrong, Conan, Swole, and Rey Mysterio.
I think I could be wrong, but that Master P angle, wasn't that part of the West Texas Rednecks or something like that?
Yeah, that was supposed to be their foes. Yeah,
their foes. Yeah, and I remember they have that. I remember Kurt Hennig would sing that song "I Hate Rap" or "Rap is Crap" or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, former 80 world champion. Oh,
yeah.
Bob Duncombe Jr. was in there. A couple other guys. Ugh. But whatever they touched turned to poo-poo.
Yeah.
David Arquette is WCW champion.
Wow.
The Insane Clown Posse, not only on the show, on the roster. Actor Robert Wool, who used to play Arliss, on wrestling TV as Arliss, in character. Chucky, the evil doll, doing promos with Rick Steiner. James Brown dancing with Ernest the Cat Miller for reasons I didn't see that one. I don't know. But here's the worst of it to me. Jay Leno in an actual tag team match.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's.
I mean, who was this? Russo? Some of the stuff.
I think it was the Russo era. Yeah, it was right around that time. It must have been. It sounds like it's got Russo written all over it.
All of it sounds like Russo.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whoever thought that would be a good idea to get Leno involved. It's almost hard to believe that it happened, that it was as big as it was, back in the day. But
I know there was a curiosity factor about that Leno match, but by the same, it wasn't Dennis Rodman in that match. It all conflates in my head.
I think it was, wasn't it like Dennis Rodman and wasn't Karl Malone in the match?
There's another one. Yeah. It's a big blur of awful. I have, it's funny. I was working on and off for WCW Magazine throughout that time period, and I have no fond memories. Not of the work or anything. I can't remember any of the matches.
Yeah.
That's how it was back then. It was just one thing thrown at you after another, and none of it made the slightest bit of sense. And yet they perpetuated for the longest time, of course, until Vince, put the kibosh on everything, and that was it.
Yeah. I mean, some of them getting back, like you just mentioned, RoboCop. I mean, things like that, when they basically take a character from a movie that's obviously a fake character in a movie, and they put him into the world of wrestling as that character is just so, it's like, I get suspension of disbelief. I get that it's pro wrestling, that it's the world of wrestling, but I think that kind of takes it a step too far. You still want to have some belief that this is an actual guy. And it kind of reminds me, it's the very similar was when WWF did it with Zeus, right? Tony Lister. When he did it with Zeus in that match, because Zeus was this actor that his name wasn't really Zeus, and they brought him in like he was really this guy that wanted to murder Hulk Hogan.
Some Bob Smith trivia for you, and I think it was the very first PWI 500. Zeus was number 500.
Oh, was he?
I put him dead last.
That's hilarious.
And I meant it too.
Yeah.
I could not justify his existence in this sport, and I'm shocked they ever let him near, because I remember all he used to do was beat his chest.
Yeah,
and I think he did a bear hug, and that was about it.
Just the bear hug. But to WWF's credit, I think they realized pretty quickly about how terrible it was, and I think he was gone just as quickly as came in. I think they did a pay-per-view with him. It was Hogan and him and Beefcake and Savage or something like that. But I think they saw that it tanked. and they realized, what the hell are we doing here? Let's end it.
Strangely enough, Zeus kept working. There was tape of him in the World Wrestling Council of Puerto Rico taking on Abdullah the Butcher.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did anything else, but let me put it this way. That's the best I can say for it. You got any more celebs there, pal?
So, I just want to mention a couple of in the music world. I know you mentioned a few musicians, but one thing that I always thought was kind of cool over the years was the really A-list musicians, A-list singers that have appeared, whether it was on Raw, whether it was singing America the Beautiful, the national anthem, whatever. WWF had people like Aretha Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
They had Gladys Knight. They had Ray Charles over the years. I mean, people like that, which I got to say is pretty impressive. And what I liked about that was that they weren't around to do an angle. They weren't around to appear more than once. No, they came out at the beginning of the show. They sang a great rendition of the anthem, whatever, and that's it. They were there for that reason, and they left after that. But if you really think about it, I mean, those were some heavyweights. Aretha Franklin. I mean, come on, who does it get any better than that? I mean, people like that were really cool to see in wrestling.
You just remind me of the end of an AWA show back when it was the Midnight Rockers, right? Michaels and Jannetty. And at the end of the show, I forget where they were, but they bring a band out on a stage and they start playing, and the Rockers come out and they start dancing around with this nobody band. It was I think a country rocking band or something, and they're singing along with them. And then you hear a voice from one of the fans going, "What is this? We want to see wrestling," which is the last words you heard before the fade.
Oh God.
Oh man. I'm like, I'm sitting at home going, that guy was right. I guess they just decided to show this country rocking band at the end of the wrestling show, but it made no sense at all. But that's Vern Gagne, yay.
Yeah.
It's disjointed, It's funny, all this stuff, we never mentioned the AWA throughout all this stuff. They must have done some bad. They must have had some celebrity involvement in there somewhere, right? Let me think.
I can't think of any.
No, they kind of stayed away from all that, didn't they?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about World Class. I don't recall any crossovers there. Interesting. Well, you know what? Big stars take big money. Nobody works for free. Everybody got paid for their efforts. So, there's a lot of back and forth between wrestling and entertainment. And, it's again, I'm kind of meh about the whole, like, if you told me that a Raw, Dua Lipa is going to be on Raw, I don't care. She's not going to wrestle, Natalia or something. So I have no interest in that. If somebody's there to sing a nice song at the beginning and do the national anthem, that's fine. I got no problem. Bad Bunny surprised me at that WrestleMania where he was flying all over the ring, and he surprised everybody else too, if you remember that match. Is it healthy for wrestling to do that? Does it, as some say, expose the business? Like anybody could do this type of thing? I'm not so sure. He had more skill than you would think he would have had. If he's not exposing the business by doing realistic moves, I don't think it's a problem. If you got in the ring and fluffed your way through a match, then you're exposing the business because you would know that, it's okay when you see a bad wrestler, like a football player, like Jim Wilson. Remember Jim Wilson? He was supposed to be a big deal because he was a football player, and he was terrible in the ring. And he never became a star because he really wasn't good, and people didn't accept it. They didn't like watching him.
Right.
But people enjoyed watching Logan Paul. They enjoyed watching Bad Bunny. So I don't know what to say other than when I watch wrestling, I want what's on the marquee. Wrestling. I want to see wrestlers. That's the way I felt then. It's the way I feel now.
Yeah, I'm sort of the belief that as long as it's done rarely, it's got to be done sparingly, and it has to just make sense. Treat it with respect. Don't bring in Johnny Knoxville to a WrestleMania and have him do some stupid match with El Generico. I'm using his old name.
Oh, Sami Zayn.
I was calling him El Generico.
Oh yeah, I had that on my list as one of the real embarrassing moments, and I still agree with it. It didn't even fit.
Yeah,
it was so obviously FAKE. It just no.
And I will say that, you just said Dua Lipa and people like that. I mean, I'll be completely transparent here. I mean, if you're talking like nowadays and celebrities, pop stars now and actors now that are really popular, I'm granted, I don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff now. I don't know really who's big these days. I'm still getting off here and putting on Aerosmith, stuff like that. So like, I'm not listening to any of this stuff today. So granted, I think a lot of that stuff is that I feel disconnected to it. So if I'm watching Raw, what do I care if Bad Bunny is on? I mean, I never heard of Bad Bunny before he was in WWE.
True.
So it's like, I try to think of it from a point of view of somebody who's younger and that's a fan that's maybe 20 years younger watching this show. But at the same time, I think the key is just do it sparingly and treat it with some form of respect. Don't make a mockery of it.
Yeah.
That's all we can ask for because, I think that's a big difference in getting back to somebody like Kaufman. The difference is Kaufman was doing it because he loved it and he really wanted to do that. They're not going to get that all the time. The majority, I would say 95% of the time, the celebrity is doing it because they want the publicity. They want to promote something. They have a new movie coming out. They have a new album coming out. But occasionally you get someone that really does enjoy doing it, and you can hope that they're going to show it some respect.
But I say we're in stone cold agreement here, so to speak, that the Andy Kaufman involvement in Memphis was the high water mark for any celebrity crossing over because he meant it. He loved it. It was in his blood. It was in his soul. Andy Kaufman, that was probably the best moments of his career.
Yeah.
Of everything he ever did, it's probably the most fun he ever had. And if you've ever seen, what's the show on Vice where they sit around talking about old wrestling moments? I think it was Lawler was talking about it. There was a documentary, a mini documentary about this.
Oh, maybe the Territories, Tales from the Territories.
Tales of the Territories. And they were up saying it was a pleasure to work with him and because he respected the business so much.
Yeah.
Jerry Jarrett and Lawler and these guys were just refusing with praise because Andy Kaufman deserved it. He played his role and he played it as well as Jimmy Hart was.
Right.
And they were there at the same time, and it wasn't too much of a good thing. It was perfect. I only wish I saw it when it was happening. I've seen it all in retrospect because there's a lot of tape out there. But I wish I'd been around to see it as it went down. Because you know what? Memphis wrestling fans didn't know how good they had it, man. That was some killer stuff.
I feel the same way. I wish I was, I guess you could always say this about so many things. And I'm like, if I was only born a few years earlier, I would have been around for that. But yeah, it was a little before my time, but I would have loved to have been around for that.
When I started with PWI in the 80s, I never had access to Memphis, but then I did have access to Memphis.
Yeah.
And from the first video cassette somebody threw me, I went, this is my favorite wrestling TV show of all time. Mm-hmm. The first time I saw it, I said, this is it. This is the flavor. This is the goods. It was funny at times. It was goofy at times. It was hard action at times. It was bloody at times. It was violent at times. And it was good wrestling at times. But it was that Memphis brawling style.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost. And Lance Russell and Dave Brown. And my God, it's the greatest wrestling show of all time. It's like some things are just perfect. And even when it was bad, Channel 5 wrestling in Memphis was great. I can't put it any differently. It's one of the highlights of my whole wrestling life was getting an opportunity, even though it was the waning days of that territory, to actually see that territory and to be on that show once knocked me down with a feather. I mean, that was wrestling nirvana for somebody like me. It was just absolutely one of the highlights of my media life was meeting Jerry Jarrett and talking to him and meeting Eric Embry and hanging out with Lawler and walking around Memphis. And people knew who I was, which was scary. I've never experienced that, even in New York City.
Yeah,
I used to go to the Garden, but people knew who I was in Memphis, and it was like a big family there, and everybody was so accommodating. And when I left, I didn't want to come home. I was like, I've had too much fun. I want to stay here. But I had to go home nonetheless. And, Eddie Marlin and Doug Gilbert, just go down the list. It was a trip of a lifetime for somebody like me. And I did it on my own dime, too. It wasn't assigned. I just decided to take a wrestling vacation. I was burnt out. Mm-hmm. And it's the best decision I ever made. I never had more fun. And Jerry Lawler was super accommodating. He was great. So I don't know what to say other than I used my natural resources to avail myself of an insider's look at Memphis wrestling, and I'll never forget it.
That's great. I mean, yeah, I envy you that you were able to do that. Those must be some great memories for sure.
And I came back with a whole mess of photos and stories to write about. So it was like a work vacation. I didn't mind at all because that was my whole jam in life at that point, was doing the wrestling thing. And yeah, cool stuff.
I want to just say one quick thing that I just looked this up. I just want to just know for my own sake. Looks like Tiny Tim was on Monday night. He was on Monday Night Raw in 1993. He was roasted by Jerry Lawler, and he had his ukulele destroyed by Bret Hart, if you could believe it.
Yeah, I believe it.
So maybe look that up later on YouTube or whatever. But I'm just glad that my memory didn't fail me there. I thought maybe I dreamt it for a second.
You know, it's amazing. All the celebrities we've talked about, there's more. There's way more than we've just talked about. It's like celebrity involvement in wrestling. I mean, it goes way back. I remember Jackie Gleason got involved at one point or something like that. It was just, if you go way, way back, I mean, to the early days of TV, wrestling was one of the things that made people go out and buy TVs. Mm-hmm. It was on prime time back then, wrestling at the Marigold and wrestling from St. Louis, all these other shows. Yep. There were prime time shows that people would go home and watch with their families, because it was even then it was cheap programming, and all you needed was a couple of cameras and an announcer, and you were ready to rock and roll. Let the wrestlers take over. I never thought I would see the day growing up as an adult that wrestling would be on prime time again. Because when I was a kid, wrestling was on fringe times. It was either on late at night or like 11 in the morning on a Saturday or Sunday.
Exactly.
But I never thought that. Now I think wrestling is on at least 4 nights a week in prime time. Of course, we have more stations now with cable and whatnot and streaming, but prime time.
Yeah.
I never thought that would happen. Even in my wildest dreams when I was working at Peter, I never thought wrestling would be regular in prime time.
There's hardly ever a day of the week that it'll be like 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night where there's not wrestling on somewhere. It's so rare that you have any night of the week that you can't find some wrestling. You turn the channels, whether you put it on regular cable, whether you do it on streaming, whether it's on this or that, it's always on. Much to my wife's dismay. When there's nothing else on, she sees what I put on, but that's another story.
You got to have 2 rooms, pal.
Oh, we do. Yeah.
You got to have 2 rooms. I mean, tastes vary. You have to have a bedroom with a TV and a front room with a TV. And that's the way it should work. I think it keeps peace in the family. You know each other well enough that you can say, I'm going to go there and watch this show for an hour. I'll be back in an hour, that type of thing. It keeps the peace.
Exactly.
By all means, keeps the
nothing
peace.
Wrong with that. Nothing wrong with spending a little time watching your own things too,
Arguing over TV has probably been the bane of families since the thing was invented. Well, even Jackie Gleason and Art Carney couldn't decide where to put the TV set, right? That's going to my apartment. Right. No, it's got to my apartment.
Kept going back and forth.
Heads I win, tails you lose. All right, it's Joe Puccio from Generation XY, one of my favorite people, one of my favorite guests here on the show always. And Joe, it's always an absolute delight. I just want to say publicly here, best of luck with everything that's going on in your life right now. And we welcome the next time you come back either here or the Entertainment Hour, which I think we have a concept for that, don't we?
We do. And thank you for inviting me on again. And I don't even know how I've been on both pods for a couple of times now. So I kind of lost count. I don't even want to.
It's only 17.
That's about it. Yeah. But anytime we have a good topic, I love coming on, whether it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour, whether it's the Outdated Entertainment Hour, which
let's let the cat in the bag. On the Entertainment Hour, we're going to do rock and roll replacements, guys who replace or women who replace the original members of very famous bands, and there are so many your head will spin. Some of them took off to greater heights. Others are hardly remembered, but I think it's a great topic, and we're going to get deep into that one because I'm a big fan of a couple of the players who were replacements. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And I know our list is going to be entirely different because we have different tastes in rock and roll music, and I think it's going to be a really good one.
I was just going to say that is I think what I'm really looking forward to about that is that I think we definitely sort of gravitate towards different genres for the most part. I do like a lot of the heavier stuff. I like a lot of the metal and the hard rock. So I think we're going to have some different people on the list. I'm going to be able to kind of pick each other's brains. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well.
As long as it doesn't turn into the Ronnie James Dio show, I'm fine.
Oh, no love for Dio?
No, I'm kidding. I kid. All right, folks, it's Joe Puccio. Thank you so much, my friend. We'll see you very soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Bob.
It is always a treat to have my good buddy Joe Puccio on the show. You know, we're close to each other. We got to be live in studio together one of these days. I got to finagle that. I can do it too. I've got the equipment. We should do it live in studio. You know, because, podcasts are done, over the wires and what have you. You record in an electronic studio and whatnot. But you know what? We could easily do it face to face. I have the stuff. So we're going to have to think about that one. In any event, Outdated Wrestling Hour. Buzzsprout.com. Your one-stop shop for everything us. Find out where to hear the podcast. There's the thing. There's an almost complete list of all the podcast apps we're available on that website, as well as all of our shows. Pick one, listen anytime you like. It's all there for the choosing. There's also a note there about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, where for a nominal fee, you can become part of this Michigaz and help us perpetuate into the future with the Outdated Wrestling Hour and the Outdated Entertainment Hour podcasts. We're having a blast with both of them, and we hope you're enjoying them too. Write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write about anything you like. I've been late getting back to people. I realize this. I will get back to you. I will promise that. There's no reason I can't get back to everybody. It's been a hairy holiday season. As we record this, it's the day after Christmas, so still getting our bearings here in snowy, freezing New York. Find us on Facebook. I'm the Bob Smith that sings with BB King. I'm also on Blue Sky, Outdated Bob. We're also on X. And we're also on the Twitter is X, excuse me. But Facebook is our main jam. We make most of our biggest announcements on Facebook. So if you can find your way there, please do. Also on Threads, and nobody looks at Threads. I get very little response on Threads because I think it's the wrong venue for this kind of thing. So look for us at Blue Sky, X, and primarily Facebook, if you'd be so very kind. That's it for this time. We got some great shows coming up in the future. In the next few weeks, we're getting them together now. We're going to have Al Castle from Pro Wrestling Illustrated coming very soon. I don't have a specific date, but just watch the listings, watch our placards that we put out telling you about it. Oh, Instagram. We're on Instagram. Duh. Outdated Bob on Instagram. Look for us there too. I always forget Instagram. See, I'm old. I can't remember everything. Where's the soap? In any event, I'm Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour podcast. A loving look back at the stuff we grew up watching, all the way to the stuff from today, with a variety of really cool guests and really fine people. So we'll see you next time. We're on every Friday. We're released into the wild every Friday. The shows are usually posted on your favorite podcast apps by Sunday. Some of them are not until Monday. If I took the time to list every app that we're on, it would probably take half the show. We're everywhere on this particular program, and I'm very happy about that. So we're not hard to find, or you can just type in the name in your browser, Outdated Wrestling Hour or Outdated Wrestling Bob Smith. Bang, it'll tell you where to go. Just that simple. Like me. See you next time. For 2 years, I've been talking about Ringo Starr. I don't think I'm going to stop now. Love the guy. Love his music. You know why? He's full of peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.